At our family dinner last Sunday, my husband pulled out my embroidered paintings and announced to everyone, "Look at this, my 40-year-old wife is playing with crafts. Maybe we should buy her a children's art set next." Everyone laughed while I sat there feeling absolutely stupid. I've been married for 12 years and somewhere along the way, I stopped recognizing the man I fell in love with. It started small, little comments here and there about how much time I spent on my hobbies. I love creating things with my hands. Always have. My grandmother taught me to embroider when I was 8, and it became my sanctuary. After long days dealing with life's chaos, sitting down with my needle and thread felt like meditation. But my husband saw it differently. He'd walk into our living room where I'd set up my embroidery hoop and shake his head. The way he'd sigh made me feel like I was doing something shameful. When friends came over, he gestured toward my work area and made jokes about his wife's little projects. The word little always stung the most. It wasn't just embroidery. I picked up knitting 2 years ago after watching my neighbor create the most beautiful scarves. I was excited to learn something new to challenge myself. I spent weeks practicing basic stitches, watching online tutorials until my fingers cramped. When I finally finished my first decent scarf, I was so proud. I showed it to him over breakfast and he barely looked up from his phone. "How much did you spend on that yarn?" was his only response. When I told him it cost about $30, he rolled his eyes. $30 for something you could buy at the store for $5. Makes perfect sense. The criticism became constant background noise. Every time I'd start a new project, he'd calculate the cost of supplies and compare it to buying something similar ready-made. He never seemed to understand that the point wasn't saving money, it was the joy of creating, the satisfaction of learning, the peace I found in repetitive motions that quieted my racing mind. Things escalated when his sister and her husband visited last month. I had just finished a cross-stitch piece I'd been working on for months, a detailed landscape with mountains and a lake. It took me over 100 hours and I was genuinely proud of the result. I had it framed and hanging in our bedroom. During dinner, he excused himself and came back carrying the framed piece. "You have to see what my wife's been doing instead of cleaning the house," he announced, holding it up like evidence in a trial. "She spent 4 months on this." 4 months. Can you imagine having that much free time? His sister laughed nervously, clearly uncomfortable, but her husband joined in. "Wow, that's very detailed. How much did the frame cost?" My face burned with embarrassment. I mumbled something about it being a hobby and tried to change the subject, but my husband wasn't done. "She's got boxes of this stuff upstairs. Yarn thread, beads, our spare room looks like a craft store exploded." Everyone laughed and I excused myself to the bathroom where I cried for 10 minutes. That night, I tried to explain how his comments made me feel. I told him my hobbies weren't just ways to pass time. They were important to me. They helped me relax. They gave me a sense of accomplishment. He listened with this patient expression that made me feel like a child complaining about scraped knees. "I'm just teasing," he said finally. "You're being too sensitive. It's cute that you have your little crafts, but don't you think it's time to focus on more adult things? Maybe take a class, learn something useful." The word useful hit me like a slap. What made his weekend golf games more useful than my embroidery? What made his fantasy football league more mature than my knitting circle? But I didn't have the energy to argue anymore. The pattern continued for months. Every gathering became an opportunity for him to showcase what he saw as my childish pursuits. He'd tell people about the fort I'd built in the spare room, which was actually just a comfortable corner with good lighting and storage for my supplies. He'd joke about my addiction to craft stores, making it sound like I was blowing our savings on frivolous purchases. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago at his company's annual barbecue. I'd spent 2 weeks making a beautiful embroidered table runner as a hostess gift for his boss's wife. It was intricate work, tiny flowers and vines that required perfect tension and careful color choices. I was nervous about giving it to her, worried she might not appreciate handmade gifts, but I wanted to make a good impression. When I presented it to her, she was genuinely delighted. She examined the stitching closely, praising the detail and asking about the technique. For a few minutes, I felt proud and accomplished. Then my husband appeared at my elbow. "She's been hunched over that thing for weeks," he said with a laugh. "I kept telling her you could just buy something from the store, but she insisted on playing arts and crafts." His boss's wife smiled politely, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. Why was he undermining what was clearly a thoughtful, skilled gift? I spent the rest of the evening watching him tell anyone who would listen about my obsession with playing house and doing kindergarten projects. Each comment felt like a needle prick, small but accumulating into real pain. That night, I made a decision. I started documenting everything, every dismissive comment, every public humiliation, every moment he made me feel small for pursuing something I loved. I filled pages in a notebook, and seeing it all written down was shocking. The pattern was undeniable. Update 1. I confronted him last Tuesday night after he came home from his usual evening out with friends. I had my notebook ready and my thoughts organized. I told him we needed to talk about his behavior toward my hobbies and how it was affecting our marriage. He immediately got defensive. "Here we go again with the victim complex," he said, settling into his recliner with an exaggerated sigh. I make a few harmless jokes and suddenly I'm the villain. I read him some of the things I'd written down, direct quotes of his comments over the past few months. As I spoke, I watched his face change. At first he looked annoyed, then uncomfortable, then something that might have been shame flickered across his features. "I didn't realize I was saying all that," he admitted quietly. "But you have to understand, sometimes it feels like you care more about your crafts than about our relationship. You spend hours on that stuff while the house falls apart around us." This frustrated me beyond words. Our house wasn't falling apart, it was clean and organized. I managed all our household responsibilities while still finding time for my hobbies. But pointing this out felt pointless because his criticism wasn't really about housework or time management. It was about control and making me feel inferior. "Why does it bother you so much that I have interests?" I asked him. "You spend just as much time on your hobbies, and I've never made you feel bad about them." He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, smaller somehow. "I guess I don't understand why you need all that stuff. We used to do everything together, and now you're always busy with your projects." This revelation surprised me. Was this jealousy? Was he feeling left out of something that had become important to me? I suggested we could find hobbies to share, activities we could enjoy together. Maybe he could learn to appreciate what I was creating, or we could find new interests that engaged both of us. He seemed open to the idea, and for a few days, things felt different. He asked questions about my current project, a detailed embroidered pillow cover with butterflies. He even sat with me while I worked one evening, asking about different stitches and commenting on the colors I'd chosen. But the change didn't last. Within a week, the old patterns returned. At dinner with another couple, he started his usual routine. "My wife has turned our spare room into a daycare center," he announced. "All she needs is finger paints and she'll have the full kindergarten experience." I felt something break inside me that night. Not just sadness or embarrassment, but a deeper realization that this wasn't going to change through conversation or compromise. He didn't respect what mattered to me, and more importantly, he didn't respect me enough to stop behavior that was clearly hurting me. I started making plans. I researched apartments in our area, calculated what I could afford on my income alone, and began the emotional work of imagining a life without constant criticism and belittlement. It wasn't an easy decision. 12 years of marriage doesn't end lightly, but I realized I'd rather be alone than spend the rest of my life feeling ashamed of things that brought me joy. Update 2. The conversation that changed everything happened completely by accident. His mother came to visit last weekend, and while he was at the store, she asked to see my recent work. I hesitantly showed her the butterfly pillow cover I'd been working on, expecting polite disinterest. Instead, she examined it with genuine fascination. She told me about her own mother, who had been an accomplished seamstress and embroiderer. As she spoke, she mentioned something that stopped me cold. "You know, he used to love watching his grandmother embroider when he was little. He'd sit for hours, completely mesmerized by her hands creating those tiny, perfect stitches." The revelation hit me like lightning. His hostility toward my crafts wasn't about the time I spent or the money I spent or any of the reasons he'd given. It was about grief and loss that he'd never processed. His beloved grandmother had died when he was 12, and somehow my embroidery was triggering emotions he didn't know how to handle. When his mother left and we were alone, I brought up what she'd told me. At first he denied it, but gradually the truth emerged. Watching me embroider brought back powerful memories of his grandmother, the woman who had been his refuge during his parents' difficult divorce, the person who made him feel special and loved during a chaotic time in his childhood. "It hurts to watch you," he admitted finally. "It makes me miss her so much I can barely breathe. And I guess I thought if I could make you stop or make it seem stupid, the feeling would go away." I understood then that his cruelty came from a place of deep pain, but understanding didn't excuse the damage he'd done to our relationship and my self-worth. I told him that while I empathized with his grief, he'd spent years making me feel terrible about something I loved, something that connected me to my own grandmother's memory. "You've been punishing me for your loss," I said. "And I can't live like that anymore." We talked for hours that night. Really talked, maybe for the first time in years. He told me about the guilt he felt for not being there when his grandmother died, about how her sewing room had been cleared out before he could say goodbye to that space, about how seeing my careful stitches brought back both beautiful memories and crushing sadness. I shared how isolated and diminished his comments had made me feel, how I'd started questioning my own interests and abilities because of his constant criticism. I told him about the apartment research and my plans to leave. That scared him. "I don't want to lose you," he said. "I didn't realize how badly I was hurting you. I thought I was just joking around." "Your jokes were designed to make me feel small," I replied. "Whether you consciously realized it or not, you were trying to take away something that made me happy because you couldn't handle your own feelings about it." Final update. It's been 2 months since that conversation, and I'm cautiously optimistic about where we're headed. The change in him wasn't immediate or perfect, but it's been real. He started by apologizing, not just saying sorry, but actually acknowledging specific ways his behavior had hurt me and damaged our relationship. More importantly, he began working through his grief about his grandmother. He found a support group for people dealing with delayed grief reactions, which seemed like an impossible coincidence but turned out to be exactly what he needed. Talking to others who'd experienced similar delayed processing helped him understand that his reaction to my crafts wasn't unusual or shameful. The transformation in our dynamic has been remarkable. Instead of mocking my projects, he now asks genuine questions about them. He's learned the names of different stitches and can recognize when I'm trying a particularly challenging technique. Last week, he surprised me by setting up better lighting in my craft corner and organizing my thread collection by color families. Most surprisingly, he asked if I would teach him some basic embroidery. His first attempts were clumsy and frustrating. His large hands struggled with the tiny needle and delicate fabric, but watching him concentrate so intently on creating something beautiful was deeply moving. He said it helped him feel connected to his grandmother's memory in a healing way rather than a painful one. We've also found new shared interests. We started taking pottery classes together, something neither of us had tried before. Working with clay side by side, learning together, making mistakes and laughing about them, it's created a different kind of intimacy in our relationship. I'm seeing glimpses of the man I fell in love with, the one who used to be excited about my passions instead of threatened by them. The public humiliation has stopped completely. At gatherings now, he'll proudly show off my work if people express interest, explaining techniques and pointing out details he's learned to appreciate. Last month at a dinner party, someone complimented a scarf I was wearing that I'd knitted myself, and instead of making a joke, he said, "She made that from scratch." The pattern is incredibly complex. I tried to follow it and couldn't even manage the first row. I'm not naive enough to think we've solved everything. Trust takes time to rebuild, and I'm still wary of sliding back into old patterns. But for the first time in years, I feel like we're actual partners again. My hobbies are no longer sources of shame or conflict. They're part of who I am, and he's learning to appreciate that person again. The biggest change is in how I feel about myself. I'd internalized so much of his criticism that I'd started questioning whether my interests were worthy or mature. Now I'm remembering why I loved creating things in the first place, not because they're practical or profitable, but because they bring beauty into the world and peace into my mind. I'm working on a new project now, a large embroidered wall hanging with a forest scene. It's the most ambitious thing I've ever attempted, with hundreds of different shades of green and complex shading techniques. When I told him about it, instead of calculating the cost or questioning the time investment, he asked if he could watch me work on it sometimes. "I think I'm finally ready to see your grandmother in your stitches instead of just missing mine," he said. It's not the ending I expected when I first started documenting his hurtful comments, but it's the one I'm grateful for. Sometimes the deepest cruelty comes from the deepest pain, and sometimes healing is possible if both people are willing to do the hard work of understanding themselves and each other. I still keep that notebook though. Not as evidence of his failures, but as a reminder of my own strength and the importance of not losing myself in someone else's unresolved grief. Some lessons are too important to forget.